This is ChangeMakers with Katie Gore, finding the right solutions for the affordable housing community.
Welcome back to my talk with Margaret Salazar, the Executive Director of the Oregon Housing and Community Services Department. Margaret, for years, affordable housing advocates and practitioners like us, we just focus solely on affordable housing. But the more our industry matures and the more complex this gets, we realize the tentacles of climate and transit and education and even healthcare. It's all part of affordable housing now, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think particularly in this moment when we're looking at, we're still in the kind of response phase in terms of COVID, of course. But as we start looking at the long-term recovery, my hope is that those conversations, those cross-sector conversations will continue to blossom. If not now, then when, right? This is our moment to think about what an equitable recovery should look like. And there's, a lot more dollars in the system. There's more need than ever before, but there's more dollars coming from, state, local, and federal with the incredible work of the new administration and Congress and putting dollars forward. But if we continue to invest in the same systems and the same siloed way of doing things, then we're not putting people at the center and we're not thinking about that holistic recovery. So I'll give you a couple of examples there. So I'm privileged to sit on Governor Kate Brown's Children's Cabinet, which is an interagency cabinet that she's created to really get at, this multi-generational approach of intervening where it's needed with Oregon's children. And multiple outcomes, whether we're talking about education and graduation rates, whether we're talking about kind of the foster care system and child welfare, whether we're talking about health outcomes or homelessness. And so in that conversation, it's an exciting one because we're able to think about housing and homelessness as one of those kind of upstream issues that helps to set families up on a foundation of success. And so when the conversation first started, one of the things folks were talking about was, how can we expand services to homeless families with children? And I sort of raised my hand and said, well, thank you for raising that, but how about we house those families with children? Let's have a concerted campaign around housing families with children, because we know that is in some cases such a game changer for families to be able to be housed. Stabilizing families, leads to better outcomes down the road in so many facets. And so one of the exciting things that is in this new Oregon housing package is a carve out for $10 million for the co-location of early learning centers in affordable rental housing. So as we are developing all of those new affordable homes, part of that 25,000 unit goal, can we build out some early learning centers in those affordable housing developments as a way to really expand our vision of how we're serving the families that reside in our properties and the overall community to help as part of helping set families up for success? So I think there's some bright spots there. And I think one of the challenges that we have in this particular moment is that we are all scrambling so hard and so fast to respond to the crisis at hand that it's that much more difficult to kind of take a look up and out and think, how can we lay those foundations for success that will be the long-term impact that we want to see on economic inequity and on the housing needs of our communities.
That's a very ambitious wraparound, but it's a good example of how you can develop something, a program or a policy to really address some of those generational issues and make a holistic housing approach. So that's a great example. And speaking of foundations for success, I want to loop back to something you mentioned earlier. You talked about this lens that you were looking through for equitable recovery and equitable policies. I want to mention, one in particular highlight, but then I want you to expand on this because you opened a $17 million development that was really a first of its kind for Native housing. and it was, very innovative to meet the needs of, the underserved of a particular community. So first, let's start with you being able to brag about a real success here for doing exactly what you were just talking about. And then let's circle back and continue that conversation.
Great. Yes, thank you. I believe that the specific development that you're referencing is Nasika Elahi, which is a
Yep.
project that we were able to finance in the city of Portland using a combination of 4% low-income housing tax credits, private activity bonds, and lift financing. And what was really exciting here was that this project was a partnership between the Native American Youth Association in Portland and the Siletz tribe, because the Siletz tribe in Oregon has a number of tribal members who, while the tribal land is not in the city of Portland, their tribal members have moved to the Portland metro area. And so they use tribal funding, Indian Housing Block Grant dollars, to actually finance the development and have a partnership with the culturally specific organization NEA. So it was an exciting model of kind of that urban rural tribal and urban community partnership, and then the state coming in as a financing partner. And yes, this is one of the things that we are really excited about, is taking some of our dollars and really learning. And I would just say we're still on our journey as an organization on this work, but finding creative ways to be able to directly fund tribes. We have a set aside now in our low income housing tax credit program for tribal proposals, as well as being able to fund culturally specific organizations rooted in Oregon's communities of color. And then also when we see kind of those service partnerships with culturally specific organizations, wanting to see that those organizations are getting appropriately compensated for that work, really at the table in the design of the program, and that we're seeing that kind of equitable deal structure as well. And I think that, we're still learning at kind of what models are going to work the best, and we're still kind of co-creating this with our community partners. But we've been able to make some great strides, and that particular development not only is a great example, but it is an absolutely beautiful development that's kind of part of the transformation of kind of ground up community development and in the Cully neighborhood of Northeast Portland, which is a very diverse neighborhood that has had a lot of disinvestment over the years. And the community is really doing it right, where the kind of redevelopment work in that community is for and by community members to really help stabilize and think about economic development, really rooted in the needs of its diverse community.
Well, it is a great example because it shows that people can do more than just awareness or objective planning or strategy inclusion, but you can actually do action steps. You can actually do developments, set asides, all of these things that you've mentioned. And I appreciate that you said your organization is still in your journey, because you truly are going to have to tailor some of your developments and your plans to what the community is saying or needing. And that shows a lot of, responsiveness of your organization. That kind of leads me to my next thought here. Your organization is so unique because you guys are really within the Oregon state government, and you're even a member of the governor's cabinet. Is that correct?
That's right.
So I'm sure that gives you better leverage for affordable housing. But just speaking generally, you've got a very engaged governor. You obviously have a very supportive legislation with what you're doing as far as funding. So, you seem to have all the pieces in place here. But if you could dream even further, what would you have in place for the state of Oregon?
Yeah, that is such a big question. I love the idea to dream, because we're all working so hard that's important. So a couple of things I want to talk about. So I think we do benefit from being within state government. And I also think that one of the things we're trying to educate people about is the role of a state housing finance agency, because We haven't had a standalone HFA here in Oregon. And so I think folks often see us more as a pass-through of dollars and maybe need a little bit more education on what we could do if we fully embrace our function as a finance agency, that, acting as a public bank and being able to invest dollars, make a modest return on those dollars, and then reinvest them and create things like evergreen funds. And so that's some of the education that we're trying to do with advocates, stakeholders, and legislators, that don't think of us just as a pass-through, think of us as an ability to really invest dollars wisely, make a return, and get Oregon that sort of financial management that it deserves for the long haul. Because we're in a period of time where we have a supportive governor and legislature, and we're so lucky and really just thrilled that the voters have made that commitment. And that will not always be the case. So we need to be able to build up our assets as a state housing finance agency so that we're here to weather those storms and to invest wisely and to be able to be there in good times and bad. The second thing I'll say is where I really get into dreamer mode is around the issue of homelessness. So I mentioned that, and I'll come back to it, and it merits coming back to, because Oregon has the dubious distinction of being in the top 5 states nationally for per capita homelessness. And, I have young children, and they are growing up in a world and in the Portland metro area where tent cities are normal for them. We drive through the city, we walk through the city. There are children living in tents and growing up in tents, and that is something that they think is normal. I'm sorry, I'm getting emotional. It is not normal. We cannot accept it. It is the humanitarian crisis of our time. We know it, and we have not had, I think, the ability or the time to dedicate to stepping back within our state, getting everybody around the table and making a strategic plan to really tackle this in a coordinated and concerted campaign to end homelessness. And so that is our vision at OHCS, is to build that coordinated and concerted campaign. As I mentioned, traditionally we've been seen as a pass-through of dollars, and then the local folks do the good work on the ground of rehousing folks, rapid rehousing, outreach, homelessness prevention. And that's all good. And if we're not kind of coordinating that work with a bigger vision, I don't think we're going to see the kind of change that we need. So one of the things that we brought forward this legislative session was a pretty controversial bill that did get passed, and we're thrilled about that. It was House Bill 2100, which was our effort to modernize our state homelessness system. It's just a first step, but it creates expectations that all of our local community providers are using a racial equity lens in their homelessness planning. We know that our communities of color are more likely to experience homelessness and unsheltered homelessness. Across the board, we talked about the Native American community. The rates in the Native American community and the African American community are significantly higher than our general population and our white population. We have work to do to address that. And so really requiring our grantees to have that equity lens in their planning, to engage with culturally specific organizations in their planning process, and to be able to create culturally responsive services in that work, and to have metrics and outcome-oriented contracts so that we're able to really hold each other accountable for the interventions that we're using on homelessness and how effective they are. And when we tie that with permanent supportive housing and that new investment, I think we have a real opportunity. And then the other piece is to be able to have a longer conversation around how we're funding homeless services instead of just acting as a pass-through, really thinking about whether some of those dollars should be competed out, whether we should be able to have a more strategic vision around addressing child and family homelessness, youth homelessness, other specific strategies, low barrier shelters, housing first strategies, rather than just kind of the passing through of the dollars. And so, that's a big conversation because it does involve changing the funding structure from the historic approach, but really inviting new partners into the conversation to be able to compete for state dollars. So That's part of that overall vision around homelessness that I'm hoping that we can really push forward.
You were amongst, what did you say? You were the highest in the nation? Is that, or
We're so
the top
the,
five?
Yes, so Oregon is in the top 5 states nationally for per capita homelessness. So the sheer numbers might look smaller than places, of course, like California, New York, but in terms of per
Uh-huh.
capita homelessness, we're in the top five. And we're number one nationally in the share of families with children that are living unsheltered.
When you think of that, I mean, even, one, two, 10, 20, 1,000, no number is really acceptable when we have, a state and a country that is so well poised economically, to have our own brethren, and sisters in this situation is really not acceptable. And so organizations like yours have a chance to really, make an impact, but it sounds like you guys are really having to start basic here with some of these types of things to really understand what the problem is and what the system looks like and how you develop, your programming and your metrics, or, whether you're considering how you fund the services. So tackling this is going to be no small feat for your agency.
It's resources and it's also systems change and really acknowledging that continuing to do things the same way we have, we're not going to get different results. So we need to have some of
Hmm.
these hard conversations about systems change and resources.
So, how do you motivate your staff to come in and tackle these large issues for your state? Is that a non issue because everybody's so vested, or are there specific techniques that you have to deploy to keep your own staff engaged to tackle this?
Thank you for that question because it gives me an opportunity to just give a shout out to the OHCS staff. We have an incredibly mission driven staff at OHCS. I mean, these folks care deeply in their bones about issues. We have staff that have personally experienced homelessness and that motivates them. We have staff that, are experts in this field and that motivates them. I will just say that, what we haven't touched on a lot today is how much the staff has stepped up in COVID response. We haven't talked much today about, in addition to the strategic plan and the new investments and housing development, we are sprinting to provide rental assistance, emergency energy assistance, emergency mortgage assistance, and all of the work that we did last year on COVID response, non-congregate sheltering. They have just been going to the well again and again and again to find a well of energy for the next sprint and the next mile because we just keep responding and responding and responding. So I will just say we have a very mission driven staff. And one of the things that we've tried to do is make sure that our staff know that they have the learning opportunities to be in national dialogues around housing, really trying to encourage that we're thought leaders and conveners and we're proactive. We need to be in the room. We need to be in learning mode. Of course, we haven't been able to travel and attend conferences this last year, but making sure that we're really soaking up those trends and kind of what we're hearing out there about best practices and how we can be doing our work better. So we've tried to instill that kind of approach in our staff that we want to open the doors for them to kind of grow professionally. I think just also appealing to the idea that, we are person-centered, that this is not just about sticks and bricks and four walls and a door. This is about human beings. And the more that we can think about wrapping around what people need on the ground, how helpful and effective that is. And I'll be honest, this has been a grueling year, especially we know folks are working from home. They're doing, virtual schooling. They're taking care of elders. This has been a lot. And so
Hmm.
we're like all organizations at this moment in time thinking about the reimagining of work, how we motivate staff going forward, how we keep people's morale up, and new flexibilities like being able to telework, being able to have hybrid work schedules, flexible work schedules. I think will also be helpful for folks as we continue to kind of keep up that morale and meet employees' needs. The other thing I think staff are probably really excited about is in that new housing package, we got significant authority to hire. And I think folks are just really eager to have some relief from their workload and have us be able to hire additional staff to help out.
Well, Margaret, we have covered a lot of categories here and a lot of progress that you are making and your team in Oregon. So you have brought forward information that I think other listeners are actually going to use as their best practice. So it's all about sharing here and trying to be working together to make sure that we are all moving affordable housing forward. So I thank you for your time and your wisdom and really appreciate everything you're doing.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Changemakers with Katie Gore. To find out more about Katie, go to quadel.com. That's QUADEL.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.